Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to the Baker Diversity Lecture Series. My name is Nicole Cook. I am the Augusta Baker Endowed Chair at the University of South Carolina. So again, thank you all for coming out this afternoon. We are in for a treat. We are going to be hearing from Dr. Aisha Johnson, who is faculty at North Carolina Central University, and doing some really amazing work that is archival, that is historical, and that is really telling needed stories in our profession. So as Dr. Johnson gets her slides up, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. We are using GoToWebinar. And when you come into GoToWebinar, all participants are automatically muted and their cameras are disabled. So with that in mind, they also do not facilitate chat. However, we are looking forward to your questions. And if you go to your dashboard, there should be a tab there that says questions. And we welcome your questions. Please enter them there. And Grace, my GA, and I will be monitoring that question box, and we will be keeping track of the questions, and we'll have some time to chat with Dr. Johnson at the conclusion of her talk. Last housekeeping item, a recording of this session will be put online probably next week, also with a PDF of her slides. So just want to let people know that will be available. Last thing, GoToMeeting unfortunately does not support live captioning, but we will have a transcript of the talk when we post the video online. So without further ado, I want to welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Aisha Johnson, to talk about her work. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for joining us. I'm very excited to hear about your project today.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you all having me. You make sure you are looking at my slideshow. All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Cook, for having me. Thank you all for taking the time out of, I'm sure, your evening teaching schedule to welcome me and listen to the talk. So this evening, of course, I am more than honored to be with you all and a part of this lecture series. So just a little bit of background about myself and talk to you about my journey to librarianship and archives. I am what you call a career Seminole. I attended Florida State University for my bachelor's in political science, master's in librarian information studies, and my doctorate in information science. I am a proud Seminole. So my experiences coming to librarianship and archives is, I don't think, as unique as anyone else's. The beauty in librarianship and in archives, but really LIS as a profession, the beauty is the field always finds good people. It's not initially, it's not often a first career choice for many people, though for me it was. But I think that in the process of searching, in some way you can make an impact, in the process of searching and how you can service people and help others better their lives and educational opportunities in some way, shape, or form. And it can be as easy as, you know, going to the library as a child. In some way, shape, or form, you are impacted by librarianship. And you remember this impact of some person or some occurrence or event, and there's an aha moment that says, that's what I want to do. That's not you finding the profession, that's the profession finding you. And I think there's beauty in it because there's authenticity in that process. So going into librarianship, for me, I was naturally interested in diversity. In our practices, diversity in our curriculum, diversity in our communities. In doing so, I continue with my doctorate and doing that type of research and taking a number of courses in the history department, as well as, of course, library and information science. One of the courses I took was a public history program, and that was my formal introduction to archives. And it assisted me greatly in the archival research that I was doing, but really introduced me to the practice. And during an internship, this is indeed where I learned best practices within the archival studies arena. It is something that I find valuable to society. Archives and librarianship provides a service, fills gaps in communication, contributions to new scholarship, new knowledge, things that impact our society in ways that can improve, shift, and help us understand each other better. So my research background, of course, is in African American history, archival administration and education, cultural heritage as social justice, and we'll talk more about that, the intellectual history and library philanthropy of the American South. I also focus on curriculum development, Southern library development, and more recently expanding on my diversity studies, women's studies within LIS. I would like to make an honorable mention of Florida State for recognizing me as a distinguished alumni, which is an extremely important honor to me, primarily simply because I'm doing what I love to do. And I encourage all of my students in whatever it is that they choose within library science, choose a soapbox, things that you are passionate about, things that you care that will have an impact on society in a manner of, you know, increasing educational opportunities, becoming more aware of other communities and cultures. I, in my program and in my teaching, feel that I am not just contributing to the curriculum, but contributing to the profession and creating a new generation of professionals who are activists for cultural heritage. So be impactful, be intentional. And that this is where I learned, you know, to always make sure that the contribution that I am seeking to make, sorry there, I'm not sure, there we go. The contribution that I am seeking to make is one with intent. And Toni Morrison says, if there's a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And that is what I did. Toni Morrison is a wonderful influence to many of us, especially in our writings about African American and other minority cultures, including minorities of like women. We want to be impactful. The reason behind us giving such information, doing such research, is the more we know, the better we can change things. We're in a better position when we have knowledge, when we're telling the untold stories about underrepresented and unseen populations. So when I came across this research, really coincidentally, during an IMLS fellowship, I was in the process of actually writing about Carnegie. And I came across this and I consulted with my committee, and we discovered that this has not been out there. This was real life, like new information to the profession. And I knew that I wanted to learn more. I wanted to read this story. So we wrote the book. Now, we focus primarily on library philanthropy, the development of libraries, especially in the South. In the area where the region was really married to a way of life that was inhibiting its growth, really. But so it took on philanthropists, community groups, charitable organizations to really invest in all types of African American institutions. And naturally, by developing those institutions, 9 times out of 10, everyone would benefit. One of the purposes in me telling this story is if you focus on the underserved, everyone will benefit. Sometimes you think the majority has access and they don't. So think about the South during this time period where not even rural whites had access to libraries, let alone schools. Because recall that the development of the education system is going to mirror that of libraries. The North is developing far quicker, than that of the South for a variety of reasons. So we see library development around 1820, 1830 with the Reading Room Society and Female Literary Society, because even though there's restricted access to African Americans, there's also restricted access to women. So you have minorities, including women, treated as secondary citizens. So not only did African Americans have to develop their own reading rooms or literary societies, so did women. If you go back and you read the books and you look at the history, there is colored reading rooms, female literary societies. So this is a disparity that we have to also address when we're talking about the development of intellectual freedom for minorities. We must focus on women as well. So though we start seeing 1828, 1829-ish library development in the North, we don't actually see development for the South until 1901 with the Charlotte Public Library. The South is significantly behind in all forms of education because it was holding on to a way of life, a custom. So though it is a rural area with a lot of small plantations, access is not really what people will naturally assume. No one really has the access. So the Julius Rosenwald Fund comes about in 1917, with his relationship with Booker T. Washington, who he admires. So it starts off experimental with a grant or funding for one-room schoolhouses around Tuskegee Institute at the time. And after those, the funding is used, Rosenwald's like, this is a really great idea. I think we need to expand on this. And between 1917 and 1936, really 1917 and 1932, and then a final school for Eleanor Roosevelt in 1936, the fund builds more than 5,300 rural schools in 15 southern states, specifically for African Americans. Now, 9 times out of 10, if your grandparents or great-grandparents were able or privileged to attend grade school, it likely was a Rosenwald school. Of course, we had major organizations like Gene Supervisors, American Library Association, the American Missionary Association, among a number of local efforts to educate African Americans and other members of the rural South. The Rosenwald schools were a major and key contributor to African American education. The education division also includes library services, which we'll talk more about, health and medical services, fellowships and scholarships to a number of library administrators, including, the wonderful Vivian Harsh and Arna Bontemps. These people were sought as scholars, movers and shakers, and Rosenwald Fund wanted to contribute towards the refinement of their knowledge and skills. And then, of course, race relations, which develops into institutions and what we call today as social studies, and ultimately cultural heritage. So we have 2 major contributors that, of course, we're going to highlight. We have Andrew Carnegie, which contributes about 2,000 libraries internationally and nationally, and then Rosenwald, who less people knew of or know of. We're still, we're spreading this gospel so you can know more about Rosenwald and his contributions of nearly 10,000 libraries, and we'll discuss the detail of that. So the goal is to improve information literacy and enhance education opportunities for African Americans. As many of you know, when we talk about enhancing literacy, it's really about access. Providing access gives us more educational opportunities. It gives people the chance to expand their horizons beyond their local environment. Sometimes success is simply sparked by exposure and access. That's one of the reasons what we do is so important to society. The value that we give society is the access and use of information. So you can take and do whatever it is that you choose to do with it. So between 1927 and 1941, the fund distributes library sets or book sets, more than 9,000. We have, of course, contributions to elementary schools, what are going to be referred to as rural schools, high schools, African-American colleges, and normal schools. Now, the African-American colleges you will hear me refer to as teacher training colleges, but also normal schools, because this is the foundation of many of them. And we will also talk about why philanthropic contributions towards HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, were a matter of survival. So 43 Black colleges and normal schools are actually qualified, because of course we know during this time period there's well over 43, but they qualified for the funding and really benefited. A number of them do not exist today, but we'll talk more about that and the exposure even to those HBCUs who are not aware that they receive Rosenwald funding. And then of course he continues or wraps up this program in 1936 with a county-wide library demonstration. And there's beauty in the time period of that demonstration that I don't think we've sung enough about. So let's talk about the rural schools. The rural schools, we really kick it off with 10 libraries in each participating Southern state. Remember, we're going to focus on 15 Southern states. We have the Upper South and the Lower South during this time period. But the library sets consist of up to 150 titles of varying books, varying subjects. So why is this so important? It's about access. It's about the ability to debunk the misconception that Black children did not read or could not read because their parents did not read or could not read. This was not the matter. The matter was actually access to adequate reading material. We had schoolhouses, but one of S.L. Smith, one of the directors of the Southern Fund, made Rosenwald realize that without a library, the school is inadequate, because we need to give students enhanced opportunities for literacy. So we educate the principals and the teachers about the use and care for the library materials. We provide free access and use to the books. There's consistent addition of new books, collection development, and policies to guide what types of books and subjects that are put in these schoolhouses. Rural schools often had multi-generations. It's funny how we've now returned to that. It's funny, you know, history is cyclical. So this schoolhouse would have multiple generations, because this is often the first time where education is accessible in the rural South. They're one-room schoolhouses, and they develop up to, you know, 9 and 10-room schoolhouses in the high schools. Service provided to community residents. Again, we debunk that myth. So they find in the papers and in the statistics that when a book is actually sent home with a student, that at least 3 to 5 other community members or persons in that home reads the book as well. Again, it's about access. Remember that our initial school libraries, our HBCUs, they also serve as community libraries, as public libraries. Annual reports from administrators and teachers are provided, and that is the beauty of this collection, because you can also not only see the collection development policies being implemented, but you can also see the enthusiasm for the material in the schools and in the community. This is what I deem reading encouragement, where they would go to the schools, the officials would go to the schools, and they would ask the students about, you know, the various stories, and they would ask the students about the material that they wanted to read. They would ask them about their home lives, how often the other people read. Again, we continuously debunk this myth that Black children could not read because of their parents. Now, African-American colleges, you know, everything Rosenwald does starts off as an experiment. It's always a one-year experiment, and we see what we're going to do and how successful it is, and then we expand it. Now, Rosenwald was definitely hesitant about doing or contributing towards African American colleges, not because he didn't want to contribute to the foundation, not because he didn't want to contribute to their missions. He didn't want to do it alone. This man was intentional about what he wanted to do, and he wanted other organizations to be influenced and inspired and to collaborate with him, because he knew he wouldn't be able to sustain such financial contributions long term by himself. He wanted not only our profession, he wanted other philanthropists as Carnegie, the General Education Board. He wanted them all to come together and contribute. But in this division, they did not. So he pushed forward. He did the year experiment. Now, mind you, a lot of HBCUs started off as normal schools and teacher training colleges, but they lacked the children's literature. How do you adequately train teachers without the proper literature? This is also a concern for accreditation when an institution, an academic college does not have an adequate library. That's a major factor in accreditation. So we'll talk about the disadvantage by design that HBCUs will set up. Now, remember, this contribution is extremely important. A number of these HBCUs still exist today, but this contribution is extremely important because many HBCUs were established based on church foundation or association. And there is this law, separation between church and state, that prohibits them, still to this day, for private schools to earn, of course, state funding or have access to state funding. But at the same time, a number of our HBCUs would not have been established if it were not for church associations. So a number of our HBCUs really were dependent on external funding to survive. So again, we have college libraries, and our book lists are going to be expanded because we want to do the reading encouragement. We're covering all type of discussions from teacher training to include all of the STEM and the humanities. We educate the teachers and the student body about the library, the use and the care for the materials. And we are having 5-year reports provided throughout the experiment. And the college libraries are actually deemed the most successful division, not only because of accreditation. The students were able to go on and do amazing and great things. They were able to actually provide trained librarians that they did not have before. This exposed the African American community to library science as a profession. Now, the high schools, we see an extension in the type of literature. We have 2,000 titles and a minimum of 15 periodicals. But what I really love about the high school division is the way we set up the library facility, the way the fund is intentional about the library facility really establishes the concept of what we know as library is place today. The environment, the cultural, the social, even down to the lighting and the furniture. They talk about 10 points for a welcoming library facility beyond its collection. I'm reading this and I'm like, this is library's place. So there's a lot that we have in place long before we actually conceptualize it. Aid is granted with further restrictions, of course, to influence educational practices. And also, a lot of these high schools were not accredited because they didn't have adequate libraries. Now imagine being a high school student at an unaccredited high school, but you're trying to go to college, and the college is going to require you a diploma from an accredited high school. That's a disservice. So a number of high school graduates did not qualify to go to college because they didn't come from an accredited high school. So we start to actually seeing a number of these high schools accredited by the state because of this library, ultimately because of Rosenwald's contributions and their ability to meet the qualifications. Now, the county library demonstration went on for 5 years, and we see 11 counties in rural counties desegregating in the 1930s. Why? Because they simply wanted their citizens, their community members, to have access. So Rosenwald had this stipulation on his money, especially for the county libraries. You had to be able to allow everyone, Black, white, urban, and rural, access to the facility and the collection. Now, we all know the histories of small county Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, the Carolinas, Tennessee, Texas, and Georgia. We know these histories. We know a lot of this history still exists today, but I don't think we recognize enough because we did not know that such counties, small rural counties in these states, were actually desegregating in the 1930s simply because they wanted access to libraries. We see bookmobiles being established, and not separate bookmobiles, not one for whites and one for, African Americans or what would be considered Negroes during this time period. We see services being provided to all. One of the things I teach foundations at one of the courses I teach is foundations at Central, and one of the things I say that first initial class period, I am the first course that they're going to take in the program, and I simply open with welcome. If you are not here to service everyone, this isn't the profession for you. We are about information literacy, yes. But we are going to focus on providing service to everyone. I say it with passion and I say it with glee because it is a foundation in what it is that we do. And one of the reasons, our profession matters so much to society. The county library demonstration was more about rendering services, educational, recreational, and cultural. We start seeing pay collections and regular collections of books, a variety of special programming, but we also start seeing adult educational programs, musical and drama organizations, actual exhibits, art galleries, and the circulation of images, slides, music scores. We start seeing intentional cultural programming for everyone, which also means that people are learning about each other. Practices of non-Rosenwald libraries. Rosenwald, being intentional to be impactful, everything, the practices, all of these things were reviewed. They always had to do annual reports. And Rosenwald's key thing was to inspire and influence other philanthropists and organizations to act in a similar way. So he actually made the Rosenwald Library sets available for purchase and donation. So these people who didn't qualify for the funding, or these counties, the schools that didn't qualify for the funding, could also provide access to their constituents, their patrons, their communities, to such rich materials. We also see the cooperation and professional training of teachers and librarians, and a cooperative study of regional problems concerning race. So one of the things I also tell my students, especially concerning archival research, is of course you naturally have questions that you want to answer, but with archival research, you must remain open. You don't just find the answer to your question and you pack up all the boxes and give them back to the archivist. No, I like to go through an entire collection, because the beauty in archives is you never know what narrative is hidden. You never know what the documents will reveal to you. And this is what I call emergent codes. I found a lot of information about the establishment of state library commissions, the library schools, specifically at HBCUs, scholarships and fellowships, training institutions, and meetings for African American librarians. Extended library service to African American cities. So think about any major metropolis with a heavy African American population. They made sure library sets were sent there. They made sure that bookmobiles were available to get around to, especially the rural cities or counties. And then libraries for military servicemen, because for the first time, you have men leaving home and have never been exposed to different people. So the military servicemen library set is going to have contributions by African Americans. It's going to have significant African American readings. So people can have them. They're not only going to the bases, but they're going to the VA hospitals as well. So my personal passion project for that was revealed really in this research was the impact on HBCU libraries. So of course we talked about the 43 that are used, but we need to really look at our HBCU library science programs. So what I discovered in my emergent codes is that there were a number of HBCUs with library science programs. Being a librarian was something of honor in the African American community. There was library science programs at Fisk, Tennessee State, Prairie View, FAMU, a number. And I'm going through the research and I'm like, what? I never, of course we know, Clark Atlanta, we know North Carolina Central University, but there are a number, of course we know Hampton, there are a number of HBCUs that still exist today that no longer have such programs, which also means we don't have as much representation as we need in this profession. So there's a debate with Julius Rosenwald and the ALA. It's the chicken or the egg debate, as I call it, the library or the librarian. So this really produced Hampton Institute's library school. And they took an exemplary teacher and sent them off to school while also building their library. So when they were done with their year of study, they had a library with an adequate collection, so they could render whatever services. And they were mentored even after their matriculation. So a number of scholarships were given specifically to African Americans pursuing administrative roles in libraries, Vivian Harsh, Arna Bontemps, and a number of others, because they were seen as promising Black women and men that could make major contributions towards African American literacy. We have to think about institutes and meetings, of course, the Conference of Negro Librarians at Fisk and Atlanta University, of course. So what's next with this? What's next is we need to discover the HBCUs that receive those 43. We need to do some mapping. We need to also do some highlighting, because while I was doing some research, I was doing the research at Fisk University, I was the one that informed them that they had a Rosenwald Library on their campus. Carnegie's name's on the placard because he also made a contribution. But Rosenwald gave $100,000 in 1930s for this library, and his name is nowhere on this plaque. His name is not only not on the plaque, they had no idea. The records were right there in the archive, but they had no idea. And a number of other HBCUs. So the highest level of Jewish giving, and he was really just honoring his culture, the highest level of Jewish giving is anonymous on both sides. He did not want his name involved. He did not want people to be aware, because he was not doing it for recognition, but he was doing it because he wanted to help, quote unquote, better mankind. And he did so by focusing on African Americans. With that library program, he focused on African Americans, but the entire American South won. The entire region got education, increased literacy, additional educational opportunities. So now we want to look at the many ways in which HBCUs were designed at a disadvantage. We want to look at the library science programs and how, what, why they no longer exist. North Carolina Central University is a wonderful program, and I'm not being biased, but it is a wonderful program, and it is the only HBCU with the SLIS program. Doesn't mean it should be. It doesn't mean that it has to be. So I call to action my entire profession. We talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion a lot. We do. We have wonderful projects and grants and all of our publications, but what are we doing to ensure diversity and representation in our field? Are we going to talk about what Hampton needs to reopen? Are we going to talk about what Clark Atlanta needs to reopen? Are we going to have the conversation of whether a private institution is the best option to reopen a library science program at HBCU? Because we don't want to further increase student loan debt among minorities. So the beauty of an HBCU is that it's not just African Americans that attend, but a variety of cultures. So by focusing on reopening, supporting, a library science program, a library information science program at an HBCU, we put our pens, our money, our discussions where our passion is. And that should be representation, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I want us to start really having some actions beyond conversations about what we need to do as a profession to make this happen. There's a lot of conversations being had, have been had, but we have to actually start maneuvering and doing some things. Again, Central is a wonderful program, but it doesn't mean that it should be the only HBCU with the School of Library and Information Science. That is my takeaway, and I hope it's yours. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me just get my camera back on so I can ask you some questions. So as I mentioned to our attendees today, if you have questions for Dr. Johnson, please enter them into the questions tab and we will get them right to her. While people are thinking about their questions, I wanted to get you to talk a little bit more about the lack of library programs at HBCUs. So for those who are not aware, there was a program at Clark Atlanta that closed, was it maybe early 2000s? 05, yeah, 05. And it was, I'm sure some politics, but also financial issues as well. What does it look like for those of us who do this work? What is the possibility of us getting another HBCU to say, we need a graduate library and information science program?
So I'm always a firm believer that when you're talking about doing something on such a massive level, you need to get all your stakeholders to the table. And I think it's a conversation that not only our profession needs to have, but we have to bring in, say, for example, the HBCU Library Alliance. We have to consider all the factors. A major factor that we have to consider is if the private HBCU is the right arena, because then we would be contributing towards, African American student loan debt, which we already know we tend to have student loan, a higher level of student loan debt than others. So we have to have conversations and considerations. We have to consider non-competing clauses in the state university systems. That's a major thing. For example, FAMU once had a library science program. They can't do that. There is a wonderful program, obviously, I'm a Seminole. So Florida State has a program, but we can't, the FAMU would be a great environment because the level that HBCU is at. You know, we all respect it. We all understand the culture behind it. The passion and enthusiasm is arguably not like many others. It would be a great environment, but we have to recognize non-competing clauses. So there's so many levels, not only financially, politically, you know, there's so many considerations to be made. And I don't think we should see those as obstacles, but opportunities that we can come together and kind of figure something out. You know, there's going to be, it's not going to happen overnight. You know, Clark Atlanta produced hundreds of African American librarians. So did Hampton. The private environment might be the right environment simply because of exposure. We have Tennessee State, we have Fisk University. You know, we have so many options, but we need to explore the politics behind these options. But we also have to be willing to support HBCUs financially in this program. As we know, HBCUs are historically underfunded, state and private. So it starts with a meeting of the minds, stakeholders, having real conversations and producing an action plan.
Exactly. And when you were talking about the non-competing clauses, I'm thinking of, North Carolina that has where you're teaching has 4 or 5 programs, right?
Yeah.
So, it also becomes a geography issue as well. In the meantime, if we cannot have another program at a HBCU, what can our existing programs, all the rest of which are at PWIs, predominantly white institutions, what can we do for these other programs to improve the environment? Let me put it that way, for our students of color, for our faculty of color. You and I both know that we need more doctoral students of color to continue that pipeline. So what can these programs do to increase to improve their environments and make them more inclusive for the students that they say they want and the faculty that they say they want?
Right. It's multifold. In any organization or any field, when you talk about recruiting more minorities, representation matters. You know, I don't, as an African American woman, I am going to look at your faculty before I apply for your job. There's comfort there. I know there's going to be support there. I know there's going to be mentorship there. That really, really matters to people of any culture, because there's a level of support that is necessary. So I think, of course, one, we need more faculty. Of course, we need more African American doctoral students. We need more, we really just need to be intentional about recruitment on all levels. And not just recruitment to check a box, because we know about the target hiring, not just recruitment to check a box, but recruitment with intention to retain that faculty and make that faculty feel welcome and supported with things like mentorship programs. There's a number of them that are in place, but we need to implement them properly, because first of all, happy people work happy for you, and they sing the praises of the institution, which will naturally recruit more minority faculty, doctoral students, and students to our master programs, because we have to make sure what we're doing is intentional about being representative in the communities as well, the people who are actually putting their hands and feet on the ground, doing the work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all part of that virtuous circle.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a question from our friend and colleague, Dr. Laverne Gray. Dr. Gray says, have you developed curriculum, or are you teaching a course on African American history, specifically in LAS? Do you believe there's a need for these courses in LAS programs?
Yes, absolutely. Yes to all of that. So we're actually in the process I've been in the process along with a colleague of mine of overhauling our archives and records management program, or our concentration at Central. And one of the things that we implement as much as possible, I actually recorded a class tonight about access, accessibility, and EDI. So one of the things that I do in all of my coursework is like infuse EDI as much as possible. I place emphasis every single class period on, representation and servicing all parties. I've taught African American courses, of course, at FAMU actually, among other institutions, and we have to again be intentional in putting these things in our curriculum. When I talk to students about theory not always translating to practice, I'm talking about service. And we also have to recognize that diversity isn't just black and white. Diversity is also gender identification. Diversity is also physical accessibility. We have to infuse all of this in our LIS curriculum. So we're overhauling our ARM curriculum and taking the opportunity to do so in our lectures as well. So I definitely encourage, a curriculum and just having honest conversations with our students.
Yeah, to follow up with that with you, so what are your thoughts or your suggestions for when people are trying to develop curriculum that is perhaps not wanted? Those of us who teach know that we have core courses, but we also have lots of electives. And it can become, a real process to say, well, we need to add this as a requirement. And that doesn't always happen. And therefore, if the class is an elective, sometimes we just get a lot of choir members, self-selecting students who want to be in those classes, which, don't get me wrong, I love the choir members. But sometimes we don't reach the people who really need this information. And I've had non-BIPOC students say to me, well, I'm only taking the class because it's trendy, diversity is trendy and things of that nature. So I guess, what are your thoughts about getting everyone to understand that this information is vital to the profession, not just to Black librarians or librarians of color? And with that in mind, how do we go about infusing this information across the curriculum as opposed to, a particular segment of the curriculum or maybe a particular course?
Be relentless. Be relentless.
I'm laughing because it's true.
Yes, be relentless, be unforgiving, be one of the things when I say that I'm creating and building little activists, the next generation of activists, I, for one, am all about building your soapbox. That is one of the things that I learned at Florida State. Go for what matters to you most. Build your soapbox on various levels and be relentless about it. So of course, it's not always well received as far as, developing curriculum, and there's a lot of fine lines and process in that, we wanted to offer it like next semester, but there's processes in place. So until those processes are approved, we can take two routes. We can talk about it in our class, but we can also write about it. Because though people within your program may be reluctant, you can build organizational support. You can, through these platforms, these major platforms that we have, our peer-reviewed journals, our blogs, our even our social media, write about it. Write about it. Every chance I get, I'm on my soapbox. You're going to naturally build the support for it. And then it begs the question, well, why aren't we teaching this? And it won't be you asking the question. It'll be others, because you can advocate so much for something that other people start advocating for you. It's a strategy and it takes time, but it is worth it because it will come to fruition. But we write about it and we talk about it in our classes as much as possible, to the point where the students are going to start asking for the curriculum.
Absolutely.
So be relentless.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Lindsay. Lindsay would like to know, do you have any advice on how to advocate for diverse curricula as an MLIS student, similar to what you were just saying, or other ways to self-educate as a supplement to existing curricula?
So there's multiple ways. And one of the things that I will initially say is, students, please know that administration listens to you. You have a power that you're not aware of. When you ask for something or you question, why don't we have this style of curriculum? Or I'm interested in this path, but I'm not getting what I need from the program. You have a power. Your evaluation, your input, your feedback really does matter, and you have to exercise that power. You have to voice it, because 9 times out of 10, it's not just you. There's others who may or may not be voicing it, but use your power, use your voice. The other way is get involved in your, say, your local library chapter. Get involved in your student chapter of ALA. Create one if it doesn't exist. And then also get involved in your national organizations. Learn more, network with people. Your national organizations are like the best networking tool, and it's a really great tool for advocacy. So you have to use your voice and get involved.
Yeah, thank you for that. And to piggyback on what Dr. Johnson just said, I would highly recommend checking out our ethnic caucuses. And, you know, I'm putting in a personal plug for the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. They're doing a lot of amazing work. They just started a new advocacy committee, and, you know, have scholarships and things. And so I think the ethnic caucuses don't get enough love. So I just want to shout them out today.
Absolutely.
All right, so, okay, so we have a comment from Tyler. Tyler says, I found evaluations and directly talking to department heads helps a lot. And we have a question from Travis. I know this is a larger conversation about pushing towards diversity within LIS across the field, but I have a question about the process of archival research here. I wonder if you have found gaps in institutional archives, given larger historical exclusions regarding non-white histories within them, that forced you to do research elsewhere, say community archives, church archives, community centers, etc. If so, what were some of the differences you found between both? Further, how might we alter these exclusions within archival pedagogy?
So good question, great question, actually. So that's twofold. So yes, I have in my own experiences found gaps in the information. So this university is primarily where I did the research for the Julius Rosenwald Fund. They have over 600 boxes of the fund's activity. It's an amazing collection. And you know, they have, it's basically a business archive, because this was a publicly traded company at one point. So you do find gaps on the other end of, you know, the people that receive the funding. So, you know, they had to naturally provide reports, but I was also considering what was happening, collection development with the statistics and things of that nature. And in that instance, especially at the HBCU level, you got to go to the HBCU to see, because he actually contributed towards HBCU library science programs too. But just the record of the contribution is there. The action and implementation, you're going to have to go to the HBCU, right? So there's a gap. Here's the thing. A lot of these records are in presidential papers that are not processed because archives are understaffed and often underfunded. So now, you know, within the research, to even take it to the next level, funny enough, you have to help the HBCU in order for me to complete my research. So my grant involves processing these papers and digitizing them, because there's many of HBCUs that have presidential papers, but they're not processed or they're not available to the public. So you have to help in order to receive. It is a two-way relationship. So yes, that does happen quite often. And you just have to figure it out. It's going to take me, you know, another year or two to get out this next situation, but it's going to benefit the masses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had similar experiences. Dr. Johnson knows that I've done some work with a group of African American students that went through the University of Illinois in the early 70s that was funded by the Carnegie Corporation. And it's just what Dr. Johnson said. It's hard to find, it's easy to find the gaps, let me put it that way. So the record of Carnegie's contribution was one place. The HBCUs had, as you said, boxes of unprocessed records and archives. So it's a tough situation. And even here at the University of South Carolina, I've got about a dozen boxes with Augusta Baker's effects that have yet to be processed. So I'm fighting that fight at a non-HBCU. And, you know, it does beg the question of what's valued and who's saying that it's valued or not valued. So I would encourage people to keep that question in mind when you're advocating and saying to these institutions, well, hey, you know, that collection matters too. Dr. E.J. Josie's collection matters, and we need to get his papers up and running for, you know, the profession.
Absolutely.
So we have a comment from Lee. Lee says, thank you very much for this lecture. I knew about Rosenwald's fund, but I always thought the Carnegie was the sole library donor. It's good to know more about his work.
Yeah, I always get that comment, and thank you. I always get that comment because, you know, to be quite frank, Carnegie liked his name on everything. Rosenwald, you know, he was honoring, and because I, for the life of me, you know, as much as, you know, I love libraries and being a minority, I had heard of Carnegie. Truthfully, I had never heard of Rosenwald beyond the schools. And a lot of people know about, especially our older population of African Americans, because 9 times out of 10, you know, my grandparents or great grandparents would have went to Rosenwald School. So, but he was ultimately honoring his Jewish heritage and reaching that highest level in all of his giving, that highest level of charity. And that's anonymous on both sides. So I respect his wishes, but I think we need to recognize his contributions. So, and his family, who, you know, I've met his great grandson, they are appreciative of these things because, you know, yes, we're going to honor his respect for his heritage, but we really need to highlight the people who made such contributions that we still benefit from today.
Absolutely. And that is a great note for us to conclude on. Thank you so very much, Dr. Johnson, for joining us today and sharing your important research. You know, I'm a big fan of kind of unearthing these hidden stories because they all have such influence on what it is we're doing today. And we need to know the full story and all of the stories. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks to everyone who came out and spent a little time with us today. As I mentioned earlier, the recording and a PDF of the slides will be up probably by Monday. And also, I'm just going to put the link to the lecture series in the chat box again. We don't have a lecture next week, but in 2 weeks, we start up again with some more excellent speakers, and we'd love to have you register and have you learn from these other experts in the field. So thanks all for joining us, and we will meet again in a couple of weeks. Thank you again so much, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending, and thank you for having me. My honor.